This video is going to cover some of the information on section 4 of your Renaissance typed outline. This is all about the art. So we're going to begin with this outline, as you can see here, starting with the patronage and what that is and the benefits of patronage. And then we'll look at the specific techniques of painting as well as architecture. And then we'll be getting into some of the specific artists. So this is a very important section, Roman numeral 4. It'll cover a couple of different videos, so just be prepared for that. So let's begin with the section on Roman numeral 4 titled Patronage. Let's take a look at that word first. When we refer to the patrons of the arts, what does that really mean? That means you are supporting the arts, and it's usually through money. You may want an artist to paint a portrait of a family member, and so you are paying that artist for their work. It could be a painter, it could be a sculptor. There are a variety of different artists that we're going to take a look at. So if you are a patron of the art, it means you are supporting the arts, and it's primarily through money. So we know that Florence was the leader in the 15th century as far as Renaissance art goes. And the 15th century, which is the 1400s, is referred to as Quattrocento. So Florence is the leader in Renaissance art, especially in the Quattrocento, which is the 1400s or 15th century. So basically what this is saying is that the Renaissance reached its height in the Italian states by the 15th century. It's the golden age of the Renaissance, okay? The height, the best parts of the Renaissance was during this time. We know that there was massive patronage for the arts, and it came from wealthy merchant families such as the Medicis. You'll get some examples of some of the works that they paid for later, and from local churches who saw the Renaissance art as a mean of glorifying God. So if the churches are commissioning the artists to do some work in their church, it's because they want to beautify their church, make it more attractive for people to come, or for people to stay, and not leave and go to a different church. Whereas the wealthy merchant families, like the Medicis, they may try to commission an artist. For example, like they want one of their family members, a portrait, painted. So that would just be an example of how the Medicis were a patron of the arts. Now, when we talk about the word patronage, there are some benefits for both the artist and the patron themselves. So let me go over that. You might want to just jot this down out to the side of number 1, little a, because I'm sure you've already run out of room on A, so maybe just out to the side you can put this down. So when it comes to the status of the patron, like what is it, what benefits a patron? And it's the fact that their status gets elevated, okay, which means they may have these, big gatherings. You see here, wealthy families, so they're having these big gatherings, and people are coming over and they see a Da Vinci painting, or they see a Michelangelo sculpture. And so you as the patron can brag about these works that you have. So it basically is showing off, your wealth, and you can brag about these works of art. Okay, so that's how it benefits the patron, elevates their status. As far as the artist goes, we know that the artist's status is also elevated because their name is going to get out, and so the recognition will be there for them. I mean, what better way is it when someone pays you to do a portrait of their family member, and then that's hanging in their home, and word spreads very quickly about your work. So your name is going to get out there thanks to these patrons. So I wanted y'all to see the benefits with both a patron as well as what it does for the artist himself. All right, so we know, again, Florence was the leader in Renaissance art as far as the 15th century goes. However, by the 1500s, which would be the 16th century, we see a shift of this art from Florence to Rome. And I've given you the explanation why this shift occurs. And that's because by the late 1400s, we're starting to see a decline of Florence. Remember, they have been invaded by outside forces. Their economy is weakening because of the shifting of the trade routes from overland to all water routes. So for that reason, the actual Renaissance art will shift from the center being in Florence to now, 100 years later, Rome. Okay? You can see here, as an example, with the patrons that come from the church, Pope Alexander VI. Make no mistake, he was notorious for spending huge sums of money on art patronage. When we start going over some of the artists and their works, you'll see me point out some of the works that the Pope actually commissioned for the church. Next, we need to take a look at the new artistic techniques on part B of your Roman numeral 4. So one of the new techniques in the art world is perspective. So when it comes to painting, a lot of the artists of the Renaissance are going to use this new technique known as perspective. So make sure you get this description of perspective. It's three-dimensional effects on a two-dimensional surface. So basically, it is going to show the illusion of depth. Now, I'm going to show you an example here in a minute, but first, to give you some contrasting view of perspective, if you are looking at a medieval painting like this one here, in contrast to a Renaissance painting that would have perspective, the medieval paintings usually looked flat and two-dimensional, just like you can see here, flat with this medieval painting, no dimension whatsoever. Here's another example of two dimensions, okay? So again, we do not see perspective in this example of a Russian painting. A third one, okay, meant to be emotional, symbolic, but again, you don't have any type of perspective in this painting. So you ready to see what perspective is? There it is. This painting by Masaccio, titled The Trinity, demonstrates the emphasis on perspective. You can see here, there's that 3D effect, okay? You can see the illusion of depth. So that is the difference between medieval work of art versus a Renaissance painting. Now, there's actually two types of perspective that I also want you to be aware of: linear and aerial perspective. Let's start with linear. Linear perspective, when you look at a painting, you will see evidence of linear perspective when the parallel lines are converging to give the illusion of depth. Just like, I'm going to go back here in Masaccio's painting. Okay, so these lines are emerging, and that's what gives the appearance of depth, or the illusion of depth, okay, with those parallel lines converging. Whereas aerial perspective, that is going to represent distant objects as fainter or appear more blue, such as the sky. Okay, for example. So that is the difference between aerial perspective versus linear perspective. When you look at a Renaissance painting and you pay attention to the faces of the subjects in the painting, you will see that those faces express unique individual characteristics, which embodied the Renaissance ideal of individualism. Remember, that is a major characteristic of this Renaissance period, how the people value their life now. And they do believe they have dignity and worth. So you can see that usually in the faces of a Renaissance painting. You see a couple of the characteristics here that Renaissance subjects typically showed more emotion, whereas if you compare it to a medieval painting, the faces are more stylized and generic. There's not going to be a lot of emotion in the face of a medieval painting. But you see here, this is one of the individuals that you will see in Botticelli's work, Primavera, and the amazing attention to detail. It's undeniable. You can tell that there's definitely emotion going on by just looking at the face of this individual. So again, that is a typical characteristic of Renaissance paintings, showing the emotion instead of being expressionless or stoic, like you would see in a medieval or a Middle Ages medieval work of art. When it comes to sculpture techniques, we see the sculptures of the Renaissance period glorifying the human body. Now, that would not take place in the Middle Ages prior to this. In the Renaissance, you're going to see often nude figures being portrayed, and that's because they're trying to, recreate the works of the ancient Greek and Romans. They had a lot of nude figures in their time period. So the Renaissance people appreciate that. And again, they're trying to revive and bring back that particular idea in sculptures. Again, you would never see that in the Middle Ages because they were so focused and centered on the church. Also, when it comes to sculptures, like the paintings, many Renaissance sculptures glorified the individual. So there's that characteristic again of the individual being glorified. We mentioned that in humanist writings as well. Here's an example. This is a 3rd century, copy of an ancient Greek statue. And again, this just reminds us that the Greeks glorified the human body. And that, of course, will influence these artists of the Renaissance. So this is a well-known Greek statue of Hercules. One of my favorite sculptings is this one pictured here, Venus de Milo. This was sculpted all the way back in 100 BC, so definitely not of the Renaissance period, but I'll give you the connection in a minute. First of all, the way it got its name was that this is a representation of Aphrodite, which is the Greek goddess of love, who to the Romans is known as Venus. So obviously that's how the Venus part came about. Well, in 1820, a French group of Navy men discovered, they unearthed this sculpting on Milos Island, which again is the rest of the name of this. It was in 2 pieces of marble that they can put together. It ends up standing 7 feet tall in height. And when they unearthed it, it didn't have arms. So no one knows to this day what happened to the arms. They were always missing. But if you want to see it today, it's in the famous Louvre Museum in Paris, France. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because this just reminds me of the Renaissance artists wanting to copy what the Greeks and Romans did.